While I was setting the table at Thanksgiving, my wife's dad recorded a video of me and posted it on Facebook with the caption, "Look at this failure. He was always a servant." My wife and her siblings laughed. I got angry and left. The next day, my wife's mother wrote, "Why can't I withdraw $2,000 from your account?" Without thinking twice, I exploded in, "Look, I'm not saying I expected a parade when I walked into the Carter household that Thanksgiving, but maybe, just maybe, a simple hey, thanks for showing up would have been nice." Instead, I got what I always got. Absolutely nothing, except a side eye from my mother-in-law, Evelyn, and a grunt from Harold, my father-in-law, who was already 3 beers deep and it wasn't even noon yet. Classic Harold. The man treated Bud Light like it was some kind of performance-enhancing drug for being a terrible human being. Sabrina, my lovely wife of 6 years, was sprawled across the couch like a cat that had just conquered a sunbeam. Her siblings, Ben, the wannabe finance bro who peaked in high school, and Tiffany, who thought posting selfies counted as a full-time job, were right there with her, all 3 of them scrolling through their phones and arguing about whose vacation photos looked more expensive. Because apparently, that's what passes for conversation in the Carter family. Not, "How are you doing?" or "What's new in your life?" but "Look at my rented yacht, peasants." Meanwhile, I was in the kitchen doing what I did best in this family, everything. I'm talking full Thanksgiving spread here, people. Turkey that I'd been brining since Tuesday, mashed potatoes from scratch because God forbid we use the instant stuff, green bean casserole with those crispy onions on top, sweet potato pie, cranberry sauce, the whole 9 yards. And who was helping me? Nobody. Sabrina claimed she'd already done so much by picking up the disposable plates from Target. Revolutionary stuff, really. I'm sure the founding fathers would have been proud. I just finished setting the dining room table, and let me tell you, I went full Martha Stewart on that thing. Silverware aligned perfectly, napkins folded into these fancy little triangles I'd learned from a YouTube video at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep thinking about how much I was dreading this day. The plates were positioned exactly 1 inch from the edge of the table. Everything looked Instagram-worthy, which was ironic considering nobody in this family would thank me. They'd just photograph it and claim they did it themselves. That's when Harold decided to make his directorial debut. I heard him before I saw him, his footsteps heavy and uneven. That telltale sign that beer number 3 had fully kicked in. I looked up and there he was, phone out. Camera pointed directly at me like I was some kind of zoo animal. He didn't even try to be subtle about it. Just stood there in his stained polo shirt and khakis that were 2 sizes too small, recording me as I folded the last napkin. "What ya doing there, sport?" he asked with this smirk that made me want to shove that napkin down his throat. But I didn't, because I'm civilized. Or stupid. Honestly, at this point, it's hard to tell the difference. "Just finishing up the table, Harold," I said, keeping my voice level and my face neutral. I'd learned years ago that showing any emotion around these people was like throwing chum in shark-infested waters. He chuckled, that wheezy, beer-soaked laugh that made him sound like a broken lawnmower. "Always so busy, aren't ya? Always working, working, working." He said it like it was an insult, like having a work ethic was some kind of character flaw. Then he walked away, still filming, and I heard him muttering something to Evelyn about dedication in the most sarcastic tone possible. I should have known right then. I should have packed up my casserole dish and walked out. But no, I'm an optimist. Or a masochist. Again, the line's pretty blurry. By the time I got the turkey to the table, a beautiful 20-pound bird that had taken me 4 hours to cook to perfection, everyone had gathered around like vultures circling roadkill. Sabrina finally looked up from her phone long enough to say, "Oh, it's ready?" as if food magically appeared when you ignored it long enough. Ben was already reaching for the beer cooler, and Tiffany was adjusting her ring light for what I can only assume was going to be a riveting TikTok about how blessed she was. Harold was at the head of the table, naturally, because God forbid anyone else sit in the throne. He cleared his throat like he was about to give the State of the Union address, and everyone quieted down. I thought maybe, just maybe, he was going to say grace or thank me for the meal, or literally anything that resembled human decency. Instead, he held up his phone and said, "Y'all gotta see this. Just posted it on Facebook." My stomach dropped. I knew. I just knew. He turned his phone around, and there I was on his Facebook feed, folding napkins in real time. looking like some kind of domestic servant. But it wasn't the video that made my blood run cold. It was the caption underneath. Look at this failure. He was always a servant. The table erupted in laughter. Not polite chuckles or awkward giggles, but full-on, doubled over, tears streaming down faces laughter. Ben slapped the table so hard the silverware jumped. Tiffany was wheezing. Even Evelyn, who usually pretended to have some semblance of class, was covering her mouth to hide her smile. And Sabrina, my wife, the woman who promised to love and cherish me through sickness and health, for better or worse. She was laughing hardest of all. "Oh my God, Dad, you didn't," she managed to say between gasps. "I did," Harold said proudly, like he'd just cured cancer instead of publicly humiliating his son-in-law on social media. Ben wiped his eyes and looked at me with this condescending grin. "Hey, you missed a spot, Jeeves." Jeeves, like I was some kind of butler. Like I hadn't just spent the last 12 hours preparing a feast for these ungrateful parasites. The table erupted in laughter again, and something inside me just snapped. Not in a dramatic, explosive way. More like a quiet click, like a lock finally turning after years of being jammed. I stood up slowly, carefully, making sure not to knock over any of the dishes I'd so meticulously prepared. Everyone was still laughing, too caught up in their own hilarity to notice that I wasn't. I grabbed my jacket from the back of my chair, and that's when Sabrina finally looked up. "Where are you going?" she asked, confused, like I was the one being unreasonable. I didn't answer. I just smiled, this calm, peaceful smile that probably made me look absolutely insane, and walked toward the door. No dramatic speech. No flipping the table or throwing dishes. Just a man quietly reclaiming his dignity one step at a time. Even though there was still mashed potato residue on my sleeve from where Tiffany had accidentally bumped into me earlier. As I reached the front door, I heard Harold call out, "Come on, sport, it was just a joke. Don't be so sensitive." I paused with my hand on the doorknob, turned around one last time, and looked at every single one of them. Sabrina looked annoyed. Ben looked amused. Tiffany was already back on her phone. Harold and Evelyn were exchanging glances like I was the problem. "Enjoy your turkey," I said quietly. Then I walked out, closing the door behind me with a soft click that somehow felt louder than slamming it ever could have. The November air hit my face like a wake-up call, cold and sharp and honest. I stood on that porch for a moment, breathing it in, feeling lighter than I had in years despite the weight of what I'd just walked away from. Somewhere behind me, I could hear muffled laughter still echoing through the walls. Let them laugh, I thought. Let them eat their turkey and take their pictures and post their little updates about how perfect their lives are. I was done being the punchline to their joke. I was done being the servant in someone else's story. I walked to my car, got in, and drove away from that house, leaving behind 6 years of mashed potatoes, folded napkins, and the last shred of respect I had for the Carter family. And I didn't look back once. I woke up the next morning on Derek's couch feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, then reversed over for good measure, and maybe run over one more time, just for fun. My neck was bent at an angle that definitely wasn't approved by any chiropractor. My back was screaming obscenities at me, and there was a mysterious stain on the couch cushion that I was choosing to ignore for the sake of my mental health. Derek's place was your classic bachelor pad. Empty pizza boxes stacked like modern art. A TV that was somehow always on ESPN even when nobody was watching. And a smell that could only be described as Axe body spray mixed with regret and old gym socks. Derek himself was in the kitchen making what he called coffee, but what actually looked like motor oil. The man thought adding 5 scoops of instant coffee to a cup of lukewarm water was artisanal brewing. I'd crashed here around midnight after driving around aimlessly for 2 hours, my phone buzzing nonstop with messages from Sabrina that I'd expertly ignored. Derek had opened the door, taken one look at my face, said the Carters, and I just nodded. He'd pointed to the couch, tossed me a blanket that smelled vaguely like Doritos, and that was that. No questions asked. This is why Derek was my best friend. The man understood that sometimes you just needed a couch and silence, not a therapy session. I was lying there contemplating whether my spine would ever forgive me when my phone started vibrating on the coffee table like it was possessed. I reached for it with the enthusiasm of someone reaching for a live grenade. The screen lit up with a text message, and when I saw who it was from, I actually laughed out loud, That kind of unhinged, slightly manic laugh that probably should have concerned me. It was from Evelyn, Sabrina's mom. The woman who once told me at a family barbecue that I seemed like the type who peaked in high school, even though I was a college graduate with a stable job and her daughter had literally peaked at her Sweet 16 party. The message read, "Why can't I withdraw $2,000 from your account?" I stared at that text for a solid 30 seconds, my brain trying to process the sheer audacity. Not "good morning." Not "is everything okay after yesterday?" Not even a "sorry my husband publicly humiliated you on Facebook and called you a failure." Nope. Just straight to "why can't I steal your money?" Excuse me? Excuse me? I sat up so fast that my back made a cracking sound that would have made a chiropractor weep. Derek looked over from the kitchen, spatula in hand, eggs burning behind him. "You good, man?" he asked. "Dude," I said, holding up my phone like it was evidence in a trial. "My mother-in-law just texted me asking why she can't withdraw $2,000 from my account." Derek's jaw dropped. The spatula fell to the floor. The eggs were definitely on fire now. "I'm sorry, what? Like, from your account? Your money?" "Apparently I've been promoted from family servant to family ATM," I said, scrolling through my phone. "And now the ATM has technical difficulties, so she's filing a complaint." That's when I noticed there were more messages. 7, to be exact. All from various members of the Carter clan, all with variations of the same theme. "What's wrong with the account? Did you change something? This is really inconvenient." Not one single message about Thanksgiving. Not one apology. Just a bunch of vultures upset that their meal ticket had suddenly grown a spine. I looked at Derek, who had now abandoned the smoking eggs entirely and was staring at me like I'd just told him aliens were real. "Bro, they've been taking money from your account." "Joint account." I corrected him, though that didn't make it any better. "Sabrina convinced me to open it 2 years ago. Said it would make bills easier. Said it showed I trusted her family." I laughed bitterly. Turns out trust meant giving them unlimited access to my checking account like it was a community piggy bank. Derek shook his head slowly. "That's insane, man. That's genuinely insane." And you know what? He was right. It was insane. But somehow, in the moment when Sabrina had suggested it, sitting in her parents' living room with everyone nodding encouragingly like I was joining a cult, it had seemed reasonable. They'd made it sound like this was what families did. Like I was being difficult by hesitating. Like my reluctance to merge my finances with people who thought I was a failure was somehow proof that I didn't love Sabrina enough. Well, congratulations to the Carter family. You played yourself. I opened my banking app with hands that were surprisingly steady. No shaking, no hesitation. Just pure, crystallized clarity. I navigated to the joint account, the one that I'd been funding for 2 years while apparently everyone else had been treating it like an all-you-can-eat buffet. The balance was lower than I remembered. Significantly lower. I started scrolling through the transaction history, and oh boy, was that a journey. There were withdrawals I definitely didn't make. A $500 charge at some boutique in downtown that I'd never heard of. Multiple $200 ATM withdrawals. A $350 charge at a steakhouse the same week I'd eaten ramen for 4 days straight because I was saving money. These people had been living large on my dime while I'd been budgeting like I was preparing for the apocalypse. "Those absolute parasites," I muttered, my thumb scrolling faster and faster. Derek had moved to sit next to me, abandoning the kitchen entirely. The smoke alarm was going off now, but neither of us cared. "How much have they taken?" "I don't even want to calculate it," I said, but my brain was already doing the math. Thousands. Easily thousands over the past 2 years. Money I'd worked overtime for. Money I'd saved by bringing lunch to work instead of eating out. Money I'd put aside thinking maybe Sabrina and I could finally take that trip to Japan she always talked about. Except now I knew where that Japan money had gone. Straight into Harold's beer fund and Tiffany's ring light collection. I took a deep breath, and then I did something that felt both reckless and absolutely necessary. I called the bank. At 9 in the morning on a Friday, I called my bank, got connected to a representative named Patricia who sounded way too cheerful for the crime I was about to commit, and I said the magic words. "I need to close my joint account and transfer everything to a new personal account." Patricia, bless her, didn't ask questions. She just said, "I can absolutely help you with that, sir." And 20 minutes later, it was done. The joint account was closed. Every remaining penny, which wasn't much, thanks to the Carter family shopping sprees. was transferred to a brand new account that only I had access to. No joint holders. No family members with withdrawal privileges. Just me, myself, and I. The second I hung up, my phone exploded. And I mean exploded. Text messages started flooding in like I'd just announced the end of the world. Evelyn was first. What did you do? Followed immediately by Harold. The account's closed? What's your problem? Then Ben. Real mature dude. Then Tiffany with about 15 crying emojis, and this is so unfair. And finally, Sabrina. We need to talk. Now. I looked at Derek, who was watching this unfold with the fascination of someone witnessing a train wreck in slow motion. Should I answer? Absolutely not, he said firmly. Let them sweat. So I did. I watched those messages come in, one after another, each one more desperate and angry than the last. Evelyn sent 8 messages in a row, each one calling me increasingly creative versions of selfish. Harold sent a text that just said grow up. It was just a joke, which made me want to throw my phone through his living room window. A joke. The man called me a failure on Facebook. His family had been draining my bank account for 2 years, and apparently, all of this was just one big hilarious joke that I was too sensitive to understand. Derek got up and turned off the smoke alarm, which had been wailing this whole time. He came back with 2 bottles of beer, even though it wasn't even 10 in the morning yet, handed me one, and raised his in a toast. To closing accounts and opening eyes, he said. I clinked my bottle against his. To realizing you've been married to a family of con artists. We drank, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Pure, unadulterated relief. Sure, my marriage was probably over. Sure, I was currently homeless and sleeping on a couch that had mysterious stains. Sure, my in-laws were probably plotting my murder via angry text message. But my bank account, that was mine again. And sometimes, that's where you have to start. By that evening, Derek's couch had officially declared war on my spine, and I needed a new refuge before I ended up needing physical therapy for the rest of my life. That's when I remembered Aunt Lucille, my mom's sister, the woman who'd raised me for 3 years after my parents divorced and Dad disappeared to find himself in Colorado. Spoiler alert. He found a 23-year-old ski instructor named Brandy instead, but that's a different story for a different therapy session. Aunt Lucille lived in this small house on the east side of town, the kind of place that smelled like vanilla candles and had those decorative roosters in the kitchen that served absolutely no purpose, but somehow made everything feel like home. She was 72 years old, barely 5 feet tall, and could intimidate a biker gang with nothing but a wooden spoon and a disappointed look. I'd called her around 4 in the afternoon, and before I could even finish explaining the situation, she'd said, "Get over here. I'm making chicken. That's Aunt Lucille for you." No judgment, no lectures, just fried chicken and unconditional support. The woman was a saint in orthopedic shoes. I showed up at her door around 6 with nothing but the clothes on my back and a duffel bag I'd borrowed from Derek that smelled like his gym socks. Aunt Lucille took one look at me, shook her head, and pulled me into a hug that somehow made me feel like I was 10 years old again, and my biggest problem was failing a spelling test. "Come on in, baby," she said, using that term of endearment she'd been calling me since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. "Dinner's almost ready, and you look like you've been hit by a bus." "More like a whole family of buses," I muttered, following her inside. Her living room was exactly as I remembered it. Floral couch that was probably older than me, coffee table covered in Reader's Digest magazines from 2003, and pictures of family members covering every available surface. There was even still a photo of me from my high school graduation, looking awkward in a cap and gown that was 2 sizes too big. Simpler times, when my biggest concern was whether I'd get into a decent college, not whether my in-laws were committing financial fraud. Lucille disappeared into the kitchen and returned 5 minutes later with a plate piled so high with fried chicken that it could have fed a small army. There were mashed potatoes, coleslaw, biscuits that were still steaming, and gravy that looked like it could solve world peace. She set it down in front of me on the coffee table and settled into her recliner with her own plate. "Now eat," she commanded, "and then you can tell me about whatever nonsense that wife of yours has pulled this time." See, Aunt Lucille had never liked Sabrina. She'd told me at my wedding, literally during the reception while we were cutting the cake, that Sabrina had the eyes of a woman who'd never washed a dish in her life. I'd laughed it off back then, thought she was just being overprotective. Turns out Aunt Lucille could spot a red flag from a mile away, probably because she'd lived through her own fair share of terrible relationships and had developed some kind of sixth sense for detecting nonsense. I ate while I talked, telling her everything. The Thanksgiving disaster, Harold's Facebook post, the joint account revelation, all of it. She listened quietly, occasionally nodding or making small disapproving sounds, but mostly just letting me vent while I demolished piece after piece of chicken. By the time I finished talking, I'd eaten half the plate and felt marginally more human. "Well," Lucille said finally, setting down her fork with a deliberate clink. "That family's about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. And your wife?" She shook her head. "Men don't cry over women who can't boil water, baby. Remember that." God bless Aunt Lucille and her country wisdom that somehow always made perfect sense. I was about to respond, probably to agree with her wholeheartedly, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I'd been ignoring it all evening. The messages had finally slowed down after I'd blocked Evelyn and Harold, but this one made my blood run cold. It was from Ben, Sabrina's insufferable brother, the guy who wore Vineyard Vines shirts and thought quoting The Wolf of Wall Street made him sound sophisticated. I picked up my phone, and my stomach dropped straight through the floor and possibly into the earth's core. It was a photo. My man cave. The one room in that godforsaken house that was supposed to be mine, the place where I'd hung my vintage movie posters and set up my gaming console and arranged my collection of graphic novels, was destroyed. And I don't mean messy. I mean absolutely annihilated. The furniture was flipped over. My posters were torn down, some of them ripped in half. My TV was face down on the floor, screen probably shattered. Books were scattered everywhere like someone had thrown them against the walls. My collectible action figures, the ones I'd been gathering since I was 12 years old, were knocked over, some clearly broken. It looked like a tornado had gone through there. Except tornadoes are natural disasters, and this was clearly deliberate. The caption under the photo read, "Cleaning day, buddy," with a little smiley face emoji, because apparently, destruction of property is hilarious when you're a Carter. Before I could even process what I was looking at, another message came through. This time from Tiffany, Ben's sister, the girl who thought influencer was a real career path. She'd sent another photo, this one showing her holding up a pair of my Superman socks, the ones my mom had given me before she passed away, one of the last birthday presents she ever bought me, and grinning like she'd just won the lottery. Her message said, "We saved your superhero socks though, face with tears of joy, face with tears of joy, face with tears of joy," followed by about 12 more laughing emojis, because subtlety had never been her strong suit. I stared at my phone, and something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even hurt. It was something colder, more calculated. It was the feeling you get when you realize that being nice hasn't gotten you anywhere, and maybe it's time to try a different approach. Aunt Lucille noticed the change in my expression. "What is it?" she asked, leaning forward in her recliner. I showed her the photos without saying a word. She looked at them, her face going through several expressions. Confusion, shock, and finally settling on pure fury. For a 72-year-old woman who stood barely 5 feet tall, she suddenly looked like she could fight God and win. "Those absolute hooligans," she hissed. "That's destruction of property. That's illegal, baby. You could call the cops right now." I could. She was right. I absolutely could call the police and report this. But looking at those photos, at Ben's smug caption and Tiffany's mocking message, I realized something. The cops would slap them with maybe a misdemeanor, maybe a fine. They'd get a stern talking to and walk away thinking they'd won because they'd gotten under my skin. No, that wasn't enough. Not even close. I set my phone down on the coffee table, face up so I could still see those photos, and I looked at Aunt Lucille. She must have seen something in my expression because her eyes widened slightly. "What are you thinking?" she asked carefully. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, my voice calm and steady in a way that surprised even me, "that I've been playing defense this whole time. I've been taking hits, absorbing insults, letting them treat me like garbage because I thought that's what you do when you love someone. You take it. You endure. You turn the other cheek. And now," Lucille prompted. I picked up another piece of chicken, took a bite, and smiled. Not a happy smile. Not even a particularly nice smile. It was the kind of smile that probably should have come with a warning label. "Now," I said, "now it's war." Aunt Lucille studied me for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Good. Those people have had it coming for a long time. Just promise me one thing. What's that? She pointed her fork at me like a weapon. Promise me you'll do it smart. Don't get yourself arrested or do anything stupid, but make them regret ever treating you like dirt. I raised my glass of sweet tea and a toast. Aunt Lucille, I promise you, when I'm done, the Carter family is going to wish they'd never met me. She clinked her glass against mine. That's my boy. I spent the rest of the evening plotting, planning, and eating the best fried chicken I'd had in years. And somewhere across town, the Carter family was probably celebrating their little act of vandalism, completely unaware that they'd just poked a bear that was tired of hibernating. Game on. The next morning, I woke up in Aunt Lucille's guest room, which was essentially a museum dedicated to the 1980s, complete with floral wallpaper and a bedspread that looked like it had survived several decades of questionable decorating choices, with a mission. A clear, focused, absolutely not going to end well for the Carters' mission. I needed my stuff. My laptop with all my work files, my passport, my clothes that didn't smell like Derek's gym bag, and whatever shreds of dignity I could salvage from that house before the Carter family decided to have a bonfire with my belongings. But there was no way in hell I was going back there myself. That would be walking straight into an ambush, and I'd watched enough action movies to know that the guy who walks into enemy territory alone usually ends up in a body bag, or at least severely inconvenienced. So I called the only person I knew who was both related to the Carters and somehow hadn't inherited their DNA-level dysfunction, my cousin Logan. Logan was Evelyn's nephew from her sister's side, which technically made him Sabrina's cousin too, but he'd always been more my friend than theirs. Probably because he was the only person in that family tree who didn't need a trust fund and a therapist to have a functional personality. The guy worked as a contractor, drove a beat-up Ford F-150 that had seen better decades, and had this remarkable ability to see through people's garbage behavior without needing a PhD in psychology. I called him around 8 in the morning, knowing he'd be up because construction guys operate on a schedule that makes roosters look lazy. He answered on the second ring. "Please tell me you finally left that circus," were his first words. No hello, no good morning. Just straight to the point. That's why I liked Logan better, I said, sitting up in bed and wincing as my back reminded me that I was 32 and sleeping on couches and guest beds for 3 days straight. I left. They destroyed my man cave, and now I need someone to go get my stuff before they decide to sell it on Craigslist or use it for target practice. There was a pause. They destroyed your man cave? Like, how destroyed are we talking? Like Hurricane Katrina met a frat party and they both decided to take out their issues on my stuff. Logan let out a low whistle. Man, that family just keeps getting classier. Yeah, I'll go. Give me an hour. I've got some supplies to pick up anyway, and honestly, I've been waiting for an excuse to tell Harold what I think of him. Logan, I appreciate the support, but maybe don't start World War III in the living room. No promises, he said cheerfully and hung up. An hour and 15 minutes later, Logan operated on what I called contractor time, which meant whenever I get there, my phone rang. I'd been helping Aunt Lucille organize her spice cabinet, which was a journey through expired seasonings dating back to the Clinton administration when Logan's name popped up on my screen. That bad? I answered. Dude. Logan's voice had that quality that meant he was either really angry or really impressed, possibly both. I've seen crime scenes that looked more respectful than your room. What did you do to these people? Kill their dog? Insult their mother? Exist. Mostly the last one, I said, abandoning the paprika from 1997. Were you able to grab anything? Yeah, I got your laptop. Found it shoved in a closet, by the way, which is weird. Your passport was in the nightstand, still there, thank God. Grabbed some clothes, your toothbrush, that framed photo of your mom you kept on the dresser. Oh, and I found your backup hard drive under the bed. Did you know about that hiding spot? Yeah, I put it there specifically because I didn't trust anyone in that house. Guess I was right. Guess you were. I heard some rustling on his end, the sound of boxes being moved. But here's the thing that's really messed up. They opened your safe. My blood went cold. They what? Your safe? The one in the closet. It's been pried open. Like, someone literally took a crowbar to it. The door's hanging off, and whatever was in there is gone. I sat down on Aunt Lucille's couch, my legs suddenly feeling like they couldn't support my weight. The safe. I'd kept important documents in there. Birth certificate, social security card, the title to my car, some savings bonds my grandmother had given me before she died. Not to mention about $800 in emergency cash that I'd been saving for. Well, for emergencies. Which apparently now included my own family robbing me blind. Everything? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Everything. It's completely empty. I'm sorry, man. Aunt Lucille, who had excellent hearing for someone her age, appeared in the doorway with a look that could melt steel. They broke into his safe? She mouthed. I nodded, and she threw her dish towel down like she was challenging someone to a duel. Logan, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Can you take pictures of everything? The man cave, the safe, all of it. And then get out of there before someone comes home. Way ahead of you. Already took about 40 photos. And don't worry, I'm grabbing the rest of your stuff now. Your comic books are mostly intact, by the way. Some of the bags are torn, but the comics themselves look okay. Oh, and I found your grandmother's quilt in the garage. It's dirty but not damaged. My grandmother's quilt. The one she'd made by hand over the course of 2 years, every stitch representing hours of love and care. They'd thrown it in the garage like it was trash. I felt something in my chest tighten, that specific kind of pain that comes from realizing the people you thought were family never actually cared about you at all. Thanks, Logan, I managed to say. Seriously, I owe you. You don't owe me anything, man. This is what family's supposed to do. Actual family, not those vultures you married into. I'm packing up the truck now. Where do you want me to drop this stuff? I gave him Aunt Lucille's address, and he promised to be there within the hour. True to his word, 55 minutes later, his truck pulled up in front of the house, bed loaded with boxes and trash bags full of my salvage belongings. He looked tired and angry, his usual easygoing expression replaced with something harder. We unloaded everything into Lucille's garage, which she'd cleared out specifically for this purpose. As we worked, Logan filled me in on the details I didn't want to hear but needed to know. Sabrina wasn't there, he said, carrying a box of books. But Tiffany was. She saw me and tried to act all innocent, like, oh hey Logan, what are you doing here? I told her I was getting your stuff before you called the cops. That shut her up real quick. Did she say anything else? Just that you were overreacting and that it was just stuff. I told her that just stuff included breaking and entering and theft, and suddenly she remembered she had somewhere to be. He shook his head. That whole family's delusional, man. They genuinely think they did nothing wrong. We finished unloading, and Logan stuck around for a beer and some of Lucille's leftover chicken. We sat in the backyard, the afternoon sun warm on our faces, and for a moment, everything felt almost normal. Then my phone rang. Evelyn's name flashed on the screen. Logan saw it and raised his eyebrows. You gonna answer that? I stared at the phone, watching it vibrate in my hand. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it go to voicemail and deal with whatever crisis she was manufacturing later. But curiosity got the better of me. I answered. Hello. He's a monster. Evelyn's voice came through the speaker, high-pitched and hysterical. She was crying. That theatrical kind of crying that sounded more like a performance than genuine emotion. Harold told everyone at the club that you needed a lesson in humility. He said you were getting too big for your britches, and that someone had to take you down a peg. I looked at Logan, who could clearly hear every word. He made a jerking-off motion with his hand, and I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. A lesson in humility, I repeated flatly. Right? By stealing from me, destroying my property, and publicly humiliating me. That's some lesson. You don't understand, she wailed. He's drinking so much now. He's telling everyone you're the reason our family is falling apart. People are asking questions about the Facebook post, and he's embarrassed. He's embarrassed, I said, letting the words hang in the air. He's embarrassed. Lady, I just got demoted from husband to unpaid butler to accused thief. And your husband is embarrassed? Don't you talk to me like that. I'm still your mother-in-law. For now, I said quietly, and the line went dead. I set my phone down and looked at Logan, who was grinning like he'd just witnessed the best show on earth. Aunt Lucille had appeared at the back door, clearly having heard everything. Well, she said, hands on her hips. Sounds like Harold's chickens are coming home to roost. I leaned back in my chair and stared up at the sky, watching clouds drift by in shapes that probably meant something if you believed in that kind of thing. Somewhere across town, Harold was probably 3 drinks deep, spinning stories to his golf buddies about how his son-in-law was the problem. Evelyn was probably crying into her wine glass. The Carter family machine was breaking down, and I hadn't even really started yet. You know what the crazy thing is? I said to no one in particular. I actually believed they cared about me. For 6 years, I convinced myself that family meant something to them. Logan crushed his beer can and tossed it into the recycling bin with perfect accuracy. Some people don't deserve families, man. They just collect people and use them up until there's nothing left. He was right. And as I sat there in Aunt Lucille's backyard, surrounded by boxes of my salvaged life, I made myself a promise. I was done being used. The Carters wanted to teach me a lesson in humility? Fine. I'd teach them one in consequences. The next few days passed in this weird limbo where I existed somewhere between recently liberated and probably should see a therapist. I'd set up camp in Aunt Lucille's guest room, surrounded by boxes of my salvaged belongings, and spent most of my time alternating between working remotely on my laptop and staring at the ceiling wondering how my life had turned into a daytime soap opera. Except soap operas had better writing and the villains were usually more subtle. I'd put my phone on Do Not Disturb, which was probably the smartest decision I'd made since leaving that Thanksgiving dinner. The messages kept coming. I could see the notification count climbing every time I glanced at the screen, but I ignored them all. There's something deeply satisfying about watching people spiral into panic when they realize their punching bag has left the ring. It's like watching a bully realize the kid they've been tormenting just transferred schools and took all his lunch money with him. Aunt Lucille had been an absolute saint through all of this. She'd knock on my door every morning with coffee and a pep talk that usually involved some variation of "those people are dumber than a box of rocks, and you're better off without them." She'd also started baking stress pies, her term, not mine, which meant I gained approximately 5 pounds in 3 days, but felt emotionally supported, so it balanced out. It was Tuesday afternoon, I think. The days had started blending together like a badly mixed smoothie when I made the mistake of opening Instagram. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Morbid curiosity, probably. That same impulse that makes you slow down to look at a car accident even though you know you're not going to like what you see. And there it was. Sabrina's Instagram story, posted 6 hours ago, already viewed by 300 people who I'm sure were just eating up the drama. She was at some upscale wine bar downtown, the kind of place that charges $18 for a glass of Pinot Grigio and calls it rustic, holding a champagne flute and smiling like she'd just won the lottery. Her makeup was perfect. Her hair was styled in those loose waves that somehow always looked effortless even though I knew it took her an hour with a curling iron. And she was wearing that blue dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. The caption read, "Some people can't handle a joke." Clinking glasses sparkles. I stared at that screen for a solid minute, my brain trying to process the sheer, unfiltered audacity. Some people can't handle a joke. Right. If joke means public defamation by your in-laws, financial theft, and destruction of personal property, then yeah, guilty as charged, Your Honor. Lock me up and throw away the key because I clearly can't take a joke. The comments section was even better, and by better, I mean absolutely infuriating. Her friends were all there with their supportive little emoji-filled messages. "You're glowing queen. His loss." Men are so sensitive these days, faced with rolling eyes. One person even wrote, "You deserve better than someone who can't laugh at themselves." And I genuinely wondered if these people had suffered some kind of mass head injury that affected their ability to understand basic human decency. But here's what really got me. Not a single person in those comments knew the full story. They saw Sabrina's carefully curated narrative, the wronged wife whose husband couldn't take a harmless family joke, and they bought it wholesale. Nobody asked questions. Nobody said, "Hey, maybe there's more to this story." They just lined up to validate her victim complex like she was handing out free designer handbags. I closed Instagram before I did something stupid like leave a comment explaining exactly what their queen and her family had been up to. That's what they wanted, a reaction, a public meltdown they could screenshot and share around. Well, tough luck. I'd already given the Carter family 6 years of reactions. They weren't getting another one. I was about to toss my phone aside and maybe stress-eat another piece of Aunt Lucille's pecan pie when my email notification pinged. Usually, I ignored those too, mostly just spam from retailers I'd bought from once 3 years ago, but this one caught my attention because the subject line read, "Checking in." The sender was Richard Morrison, Harold's boss. I sat up so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash. Richard Morrison was the regional director at the investment firm where Harold worked, and I'd met him exactly twice. Once at the company holiday party where Harold had introduced me as my daughter's husband, like I didn't have a name, and once at some charity golf tournament where Harold had spent 4 hours trying to impress him while I carried his clubs like a caddy. Morrison had seemed nice enough both times. One of those professional executive types who wore expensive suits and remembered everyone's names and made you feel like you were the most important person in the room, even when you weren't. I opened the email with hands that were suddenly shaking slightly. "Hi there." It began, casual and friendly in that way that successful business people have perfected. "I hope this message finds you well. I came across a video that Harold posted on Facebook last week, and I wanted to reach out personally to check if everything is okay." The caption seemed concerning. "If you ever need someone to talk to, or if there's anything I can do to help, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know workplace dynamics can sometimes spill over into personal lives, and I want to make sure everyone in our extended company family is doing all right. Best regards, Richard Morrison." I read it 3 times, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Harold's boss, his boss, had seen the video. The one where Harold filmed me setting the table and called me a failure. The one where he'd publicly humiliated me for the entertainment of his Facebook friends. And not only had Morrison seen it, but he'd found it concerning enough to email me personally. Oh, this was beautiful. This was poetry. This was karma arriving via corporate email with perfect grammar and professional courtesy. I called Logan immediately. He answered on the first ring, probably because he could sense when drama was about to unfold. The man had instincts. "Please tell me you've got good news," he said by way of greeting. I could hear power tools in the background. He was clearly on a job site. "Harold's boss saw the video," I said, unable to keep the grin out of my voice. He emailed me asking if I'm okay. There was a pause, then Logan started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-on, gasping for air belly laugh that probably made his co-workers think he'd lost his mind. "You're kidding. Please tell me you're not kidding." "Dead serious." Morrison, that's his boss, sent me this super professional, super concerned email about the concerning caption and offered to help if I need anything. "Oh man," Logan wheezed between laughs. "Harold's probably crapping his pants right now. You know how paranoid he is about his job. He talks about Morrison like the guy's his dad or something." He was right. Harold was obsessed with impressing Richard Morrison. He'd spent years trying to climb the corporate ladder at that firm, networking and schmoozing and playing golf with people he probably didn't even like. The last thing he'd want is for his boss to think he was some kind of family tyrant who publicly humiliated people for fun. I spent the next 10 minutes crafting a response to Morrison's email. It needed to be perfect, professional but honest, concerned but not overdramatic. I went through about 15 drafts before settling on something that essentially said, "Thank you for reaching out. The situation has been difficult, but I'm managing. I appreciate your concern and your professionalism." With just enough subtext to suggest that yes, Harold's behavior had been as inappropriate as it looked. I hit send and immediately felt this rush of satisfaction. Not revenge, exactly. More like justice. Harold had tried to humiliate me publicly, and now his boss was asking questions. The internet had done what it does best, remembered his stupidity longer than his paycheck. Aunt Lucille appeared in my doorway holding a tray with sweet tea and cookies. "You're smiling," she observed. "That's either really good or really bad." Harold's boss saw the video and emailed me to see if I'm okay. I said, still grinning. She set the tray down and smiled. That slow, satisfied smile that said she'd lived long enough to know that karma always collected its debts eventually. Well. Looks like Harold's little joke isn't so funny anymore, is it?" "Nope," I said, taking a cookie. "Turns out public humiliation is only fun until your boss starts asking questions about your character." My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize at first, then realized it was Harold's work phone. The message was short. "We need to talk. This is getting out of hand." I showed it to Lucille, who snorted. "Out of hand? Now it's out of hand? Not when they were stealing from you or destroying your things." She was right. Everything had been perfectly fine when I was the one suffering. But now that there were actual consequences for Harold, suddenly things were getting out of hand. Suddenly, we needed to talk. Suddenly, there was urgency. I typed back a simple response. "No thanks. Talk to your boss instead." Then I blocked his work number 2, finished my cookie, and spent the rest of the evening researching divorce lawyers. Because if the Carter family thought this was getting out of hand now, they hadn't seen anything yet. The man who mocked me online was about to learn a very important lesson. The internet never forgets. Employers care about reputation. And sometimes the quiet guy who set the table had been taking notes the whole time. Game on, Harold. Game on. It was Thursday morning when Logan showed up at Aunt Lucille's house looking like he'd just discovered aliens were real and they were running a Ponzi scheme. He was holding a manila envelope like it might explode at any second, and his expression was somewhere between confused and absolutely furious. Which, coming from Logan, who was usually the most laid-back person I'd ever met, was saying something. "You need to see this," he said, not even bothering with a greeting. He walked straight past me into the living room where Aunt Lucille was watching her morning game shows and slapped the envelope down on the coffee table like he was serving legal papers. "Good morning to you too," I said, following him. "What is that?" "Found it on Harold's porch about an hour ago. I went back to grab that box of your winter clothes from the garage, you know, the one with your good coat, and this was just sitting there. It's addressed to you." I picked up the envelope. Sure enough, my name was scrawled across the front in handwriting that I recognized immediately, Harold's. The man wrote like a doctor having a seizure, all slanted letters and incomprehensible loops. There was no postage, no return address, just my name and the word important, underlined 3 times like he thought emphasis made him more credible. Aunt Lucille muted her show and turned to watch. "This ought to be good," she said, settling deeper into her recliner like she was preparing for a performance. I opened the envelope carefully, half expecting glitter to explode out like some kind of passive-aggressive greeting card. Instead, 2 old photographs fell out and landed on the coffee table. Wedding photos. One of Sabrina and me cutting the cake, both of us smiling like we'd just won the lottery instead of signing up for 6 years of psychological warfare. The other was from the reception, me in my tuxedo looking way too optimistic about my future, surrounded by the Carter family who were all grinning like they'd just successfully sold a timeshare to someone who didn't want one. "Subtle," Logan muttered, picking up one of the photos. "Nothing says, I'm about to apologize, like sending someone pictures of happier times." But the photos were just the opening act. The real show was the 4 pages of handwritten letter paper tucked inside the envelope. I pulled them out and immediately regretted every decision that had led me to this moment. Harold's handwriting was even worse when he was trying to be sincere. It looked like he'd written this while riding a mechanical bull during an earthquake. I started reading out loud, because this kind of masterpiece needed an audience. "Dear son," I began, and Logan immediately snorted. "Oh, we're starting with dear son. That's rich. He's never called me that to my face. But sure, we're family now that he needs something." I continued. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Thanksgiving, and I realize now that maybe I didn't handle things the right way." I looked up. Maybe he didn't handle things right. Not, I was completely wrong, or I'm a terrible person. Just maybe. Aunt Lucille shook her head. "Keep reading. This is better than my stories. You were never easy to understand." I read, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You always kept to yourself, always working, always busy. We never really knew what you were thinking." I paused. Right, because making conversation with people who think I'm a failure seemed like such a great use of my time. Logan was pacing now, his contractor boots making small thuds on Lucille's carpet. "This is unbelievable. He's making it your fault that you didn't enjoy being insulted." "Oh, it gets better," I said, scanning ahead. "You acted like you were better than us sometimes. Always so proper, so careful with your words. It made us uncomfortable." I laughed, that sharp, bitter laugh that comes out when something is so absurd you can't even process it normally. I acted better than them. I acted better. I was literally their servant. I cooked their meals. I cleaned up after them. I let them drain my bank account. How exactly was I acting superior? By using complete sentences? Maybe by not committing fraud? Logan suggested. That probably made them feel bad about themselves. I kept reading, getting angrier with each sentence. Harold went on for 3 pages about how misunderstood he was, how family dynamics are complicated, how jokes sometimes go too far, and how he never meant to hurt me. It was a masterclass in non-apology apologies, the kind of thing a politician would write after getting caught doing something illegal, but not quite illegal enough to go to jail for. And then I got to page 4, and my blood turned to ice. There's something I need to tell you, I read slowly. Something I've been meaning to explain for a while now. I once took a small loan in your name. Just a small one, to help with some business expenses. I planned to pay it off before you noticed. I thought I was protecting the family, protecting Sabrina's future. But things got complicated and... He what? Logan shouted, startling Aunt Lucille so badly she nearly dropped her coffee mug. I couldn't speak. I just stared at that sentence, reading it over and over like maybe I'd misunderstood, like maybe Harold had written, I once took a small loan application, or I once thought about taking a loan, but no. There it was, in black and white, written in his terrible handwriting. He'd taken out a loan in my name. Identity theft. Fraud. A federal crime, spelled out in a confession letter like it was just some minor oopsie that anyone could make. That son of a... Lucille started, then caught herself. That absolute criminal. How much? Logan asked, and I realized I'd stopped reading. I scanned the rest of the page, but Harold hadn't included that detail. Probably because he knew that any amount would sound bad when you were confessing to identity theft. My hands were shaking, not from fear or sadness, but from pure, crystallized rage. This man, this absolute dumpster fire of a human being, had stolen my identity. He'd forged my signature, used my credit, taken out loans that I was legally responsible for, all while calling me a failure to his Facebook friends and letting his family destroy my belongings. We need to check your credit report, Logan said, already pulling out his phone. Right now? Because if he took out one loan, who knows what else is on there? He was right. We spent the next 20 minutes huddled around my laptop, pulling up my credit report from all 3 bureaus. And there they were, like landmines buried in my financial history. 2 credit cards I'd never opened. One from Chase with a balance of $3,200. Another from Capital One with $2,800. Both opened 3 years ago, right after Sabrina and I had bought our first house together. When Harold would have had easy access to all my personal information because I'd stupidly trusted him to help with the paperwork. The statements were all delivered to an address I didn't recognize. Minimum payments had been made sporadically, just enough to keep them from defaulting, but not enough to actually pay them down. My credit score had taken a hit. Not enough to ruin me, but enough to matter. Enough to affect interest rates on future loans. Enough to show up on background checks. Enough to prove that Harold had been systematically stealing from me for years. Logan was staring at the screen like he'd just witnessed a murder. $3,600 in interest and fees, he said, pointing at the numbers. That's what he's cost you in interest alone, not counting the actual balances. This man is a parasite. This man makes criminals look lazy, I said, echoing Logan's words from earlier. Except now it wasn't just a joke. It was literally true. Harold had committed identity theft, fraud, and probably about 15 other crimes that I'd need a lawyer to properly name. Aunt Lucille had been quiet through all of this, which was unusual for her. When I looked over, she was gripping the arms of her recliner so hard her knuckles had gone white. You're calling a lawyer, she said. It wasn't a question. You're calling a lawyer right now, and you're pressing charges, and you're making sure that man never works in finance again. She was right. She was absolutely right. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This wasn't just hurt feelings or destroyed property or mean Facebook posts. This was actual, prosecutable, go-to-jail crime. And I had the confession letter to prove it. I pulled out my phone and started searching for criminal defense attorneys. Or wait, I wasn't the one who needed defending. I needed a lawyer who specialized in identity theft and fraud. Someone who could look at Harold's letter and my credit report and see what I saw. A clear-cut case of financial abuse. I know a guy, Logan said, reading my mind. My buddy Jake's brother is a lawyer. Does a lot of white-collar crime stuff. He helped my uncle when his business partner embezzled money. I can call him right now if you want. Call him, I said, staring at Harold's letter spread out on the coffee table like evidence at a crime scene. Because that's what it was now. Evidence. Harold had been so confident in his manipulation, so sure that I'd read his letter and feel sorry for him and let it all slide, that he'd literally confessed to multiple felonies in writing. The man didn't just insult me. He robbed me with a smile and called it protecting the family. He turned me into his personal credit mule, ran up thousands in debt, trashed my credit score, and then had the audacity to write me a letter acting like he was the victim of circumstances. Well, Harold, I thought, carefully folding the letter back up and placing it in the envelope. Let's see how victimized you feel when a prosecutor reads this. Logan was already on the phone, explaining the situation to his contact in rapid-fire sentences punctuated by increasingly creative curse words. Aunt Lucille had gotten up and started stress baking again. I could hear her banging around in the kitchen, muttering things about jail and common decency and people like that. I sat there on the couch, holding Harold's confession letter, and smiled. Not because any of this was funny, but because for the first time since Thanksgiving, I wasn't just reacting. I was acting, and Harold Carter was about to learn that some jokes have punchlines that involve federal prosecutors. Logan's lawyer friend, a guy named Marcus Chun who looked way too young to be handling felony cases, but apparently had a conviction rate that made prosecutors nervous, told me it would take a few days to file the initial paperwork. Something about gathering evidence and building an airtight case and a bunch of other legal jargon that basically translated to Harold screwed, but Rome wasn't burned in a day. So I was sitting in Aunt Lucille's living room that Friday afternoon, eating leftover meatloaf and trying not to check my phone every 5 minutes, when Evelyn decided to make her grand reappearance in my life. The text came through around 3 o'clock, right when I was starting to think maybe the Carter family had finally gotten the hint that I wanted absolutely nothing to do with them. But no, that would have required self-awareness and basic pattern recognition, two things the Carters had in shorter supply than common sense. There's something in your old room you should see. That was it. No context, no explanation, no, hey, sorry, my husband committed multiple felonies against you. Just a cryptic message that sounded like the opening line of a horror movie where the protagonist does something stupid and ends up regretting it for the remaining 90 minutes. I stared at that text for a solid minute, my brain going through all the possible scenarios. This was obviously a trap. It had to be. Evelyn was probably sitting in that house right now with Sabrina and Harold, all of them gathered around like a villain committee, planning what fresh hell they could unleash if I was dumb enough to show up. Maybe they'd set up cameras to film me breaking in. Maybe they'd hidden something incriminating in the room and were planning to call the cops. Maybe they just wanted another chance to insult me to my face because the Facebook post wasn't satisfying enough. Absolutely not, Logan said when I showed him the message. He was sprawled in Lucille's recliner, his work boots leaving tiny dirt marks on the footrest that Lucille would definitely make him vacuum later. That's bait, man. That's the textbook definition of bait. They want you to come over so they can pull some kind of setup. He was right. Every rational part of my brain was screaming, don't do it. You idiot. It's a trap. Have you learned nothing from the past 2 weeks? But there was this other part, the part that had been married to this family for 6 years and unfortunately knew how they operated. That was curious. Because Evelyn didn't do vague. The woman could turn a simple grocery list into a 3-act play with commentary. If she was being mysterious, it meant she either wanted something or she'd found something she didn't know how to handle. I'm not going, I said firmly. But, Logan groaned. Oh no, I know that but. That's the but that leads to bad decisions and uncomfortable situations. But maybe you could go check it out? I finished, giving him my most convincing smile. Just a quick in and out. See what she's talking about. If it's nothing, we ignore it. If it's something, it's probably something terrible that will make you even angrier than you already are, Logan pointed out. But he was already standing up, grabbing his keys from the coffee table. Fine. But if they try to film me or set me up or do anything weird, I'm out. And you owe me, like, 50 beers for this. Deal, I said, watching him head for the door. And Logan, be careful. These people are clearly capable of anything. He left, and I spent the next 45 minutes pacing around Aunt Lucille's house like an expectant father in a sitcom. Lucille tried to distract me with stories about her bridge club drama. Apparently someone named Gladys had accused someone named Margaret of cheating, which had split the entire club into warring factions, but I couldn't focus. My mind was running through every possible scenario, each one worse than the last. When Logan finally called, I answered before the first ring finished. What did you find? Dude. His voice had that quality again, that mix of disbelief and fury that I was getting way too familiar with. You need to sit down for this. I was already sitting, but I gripped the arm of the couch anyway. Just tell me. I found a shoebox. Under the bed in your old room. Pushed way back in the corner like someone was trying to hide it. Evelyn wasn't there. She left it on the porch and took off before I showed up, which is suspicious as hell, but the box was right where she said it would be. What's in it? I asked, my stomach already sinking. Letters. Old receipts. Some pictures from when you were a kid. And a bank book. He paused. From First National. In your name. Dated from when you were 18. My heart stopped. Actually stopped for a second before remembering it had a job to do and reluctantly starting up again. A bank book? I never opened an account at First National. Yeah, you did. Well, someone did. Your grandmother did, actually. There's a letter in here from her. I'm reading it now. I heard papers rustling. It says, okay, here it is. My dearest grandson, I've opened this account for your future. $4,000 to help you start your life when you're ready. Use it wisely. Use it well. And know that your grandmother loves you more than all the stars in the sky. I couldn't breathe. My grandmother. My dad's mom. The woman who used to make me chocolate chip pancakes every Sunday morning and who died when I was 23, right before I met Sabrina. She'd opened an account for me. For $1,000, which in the early 2000s was serious money for a woman living on a teacher's pension. Money she'd saved, probably penny by penny, because she wanted to make sure I had something to build my future on. The balance, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. What's the current balance? Logan was quiet for a long moment. Too long. 0, he finally said. It was drained. Multiple withdrawals starting. He paused again, and I could practically hear him checking dates. 2 weeks after your wedding. The last withdrawal was about 3 years ago, cleaned out the remaining balance of $87. The room tilted. Actually physically tilted, or maybe that was just my entire worldview shifting on its axis. Harold hadn't just stolen from me. He hadn't just taken out credit cards or loans. He'd stolen from my dead grandmother. He'd taken money that she'd saved for me, money that represented years of her love and sacrifice and hope for my future, and he drained it like it was his own personal piggy bank. Are you still there? Logan asked. Man, say something. You're freaking me out. I'm here, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. That eerie, dangerous calm that comes right before a storm. What else is in the box? Receipts. Looks like Harold used the money for. Jesus, a fishing boat? There's a receipt here for a down payment on a fishing boat. And some golf club membership. And, he trailed off. There's a receipt from a jewelry store. $3,000 for a bracelet. Dated 6 months after your wedding. My hands were shaking now, but not from sadness. From pure, white-hot rage. Harold had taken my grandmother's gift, money she'd saved from her meager teacher's salary, money she'd set aside with a handwritten note about love and stars, and he'd spent it on toys for himself. A fishing boat he'd probably used twice. A golf membership at some pretentious country club where he could bore other middle-aged men with stories about his son-in-law, the failure. And a bracelet, probably for Evelyn, probably for some anniversary or birthday, bought with stolen money and presented like he was some kind of generous husband. Bring me everything, I said, my voice steady and cold. Every letter, every receipt, every piece of paper in that box. And Logan? Yeah. Thank Evelyn for me. Tell her she just handed me enough evidence to bury Harold so deep he'll need a mining crew to find daylight. Logan laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. You know this is going to get ugly, right? Like, nuclear-level ugly. The kind of ugly that ends up on the news. Good, I said. Let it get ugly. Let it get so ugly that people tell stories about it to scare their kids into being decent human beings. Harold wanted to teach me a lesson in humility? Fine. I'm about to teach him a lesson in consequences. Logan showed up 30 minutes later with the shoebox, and we spent the rest of the evening documenting everything. I took photos of every receipt, every letter, the bank book with its tragic decline from $4,000 to 0. My grandmother's handwriting, shaky but careful, full of love and hope, stared up at me from that letter, and I had to put it down twice because my vision got blurry and I wasn't crying. I was just processing. Aunt Lucille sat with me while I read through everything, her hand on my shoulder, not saying anything, because what was there to say? Harold had stolen from a dead woman. He'd taken money meant to help me build a life, and used it to fund his own hobbies and luxuries. And he'd done it all while calling me a failure, while letting his family mock me and use me and treat me like I was less than human. Your grandmother would be proud of you, Lucille finally said, squeezing my shoulder, for standing up to him, for not letting them get away with it. I looked at that bank book at the zeros where my future should have been, and I made a decision. Harold hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen something that couldn't be quantified in dollars. My grandmother's final act of love, her last gift to me. And for that, there would be no forgiveness, no mercy, no family reconciliation. Marcus Chun, when I called him and told him about the shoebox, actually whistled. "You've got him," he said simply. "Between the confession letter and this banking evidence, you've got him dead to rights. Identity theft, fraud, elder abuse if your grandmother was alive when he got the account information. She was," I said. "She died 3 months after my wedding. He probably got all my personal information from the wedding paperwork. Even better. Well, not better for you, but better for the case. This is prosecutable 6 ways from Sunday." I hung up and looked at Logan and Lucille, who were both watching me like I was about to announce the end of the world. Maybe I was. The world the Carter family knew, anyway. The one where they could do whatever they wanted without consequences, where family meant having an endless supply of people to use and abuse. That world was about to end, and I was going to be the one holding the match. Marcus Chin's office was located in one of those renovated downtown buildings that used to be a warehouse or a factory or something equally industrial before someone with too much money and a vision decided it needed exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. The kind of place where you half expected to see a startup founder walking around with a laptop and a kombucha talking about disrupting the sandwich industry. But instead of tech bros, the building housed law offices, accounting firms, and a coffee shop on the first floor that charged $9 for a latte and called it artisanal. I showed up on Monday morning carrying a folder that was basically my life's worst hits compilation. Harold's confession letter, the credit reports showing the fraudulent accounts, bank statements, receipts from the shoebox, and my grandmother's letter that I'd carefully placed in a plastic sleeve because I couldn't handle the idea of anything happening to it. Logan had offered to come with me for moral support, but I told him he'd done enough. The man had already spent more time dealing with my in-laws' criminal activity than any reasonable person should have to, and he had actual paying jobs to get to. Marcus met me in the lobby, and I immediately understood why Logan had recommended him. The guy looked like he was maybe 30, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my car payment, and had this energy about him like he'd already won the case before it even started. He shook my hand with the grip of someone who lifted weights for fun and led me up to his office on the 3rd floor. "Coffee," he offered, gesturing to a fancy machine in the corner that looked like it required a PhD to operate. Fair warning, it's basically rocket fuel. My paralegal says I'm single-handedly keeping the local cardiologist in business. "I'll take my chances," I said, because at this point, a heart attack seemed like a minor inconvenience compared to everything else I was dealing with. He made us both coffee, which was, as advertised, strong enough to wake the dead, and we settled into the chairs around his desk. The office was exactly what you'd expect from a successful young lawyer. Diplomas on the wall, law books that probably cost more than my college textbooks, a photo of him shaking hands with someone important at some event, and absolutely zero personal touches that might make him seem human. It was an office designed to say, "I will destroy your enemies and bill you appropriately for it." I laid out everything on his desk like I was presenting evidence at a trial, which I guess I kind of was. Marcus picked up each document carefully, his expression shifting from professional interest to genuine shock as he read through Harold's confession letter. "He actually wrote this down," Marcus said, not quite a question, more like he was confirming that reality was as stupid as it appeared. He confessed to identity theft and fraud in a letter. On paper, with his handwriting. Apparently, Harold's understanding of self-preservation is about as developed as his understanding of basic human decency, I said, taking a sip of coffee that immediately made my teeth hurt. Which is to say, non-existent. Marcus actually laughed at that, a short bark of amusement before he caught himself and returned to professional mode. He spent the next 20 minutes going through every document, occasionally making notes on a legal pad, asking questions about dates and amounts and timelines. When he got to my grandmother's letter and the bank statements showing the account being drained, his jaw actually clenched. "This is elder financial abuse," he said quietly. "Your grandmother was still alive when he accessed this account. She died 3 months after my wedding. Harold had access to all my personal documents because we were doing the marriage paperwork, buying a house, all that stuff. I trusted him." I laughed bitterly. What an idiot I was. You weren't an idiot. You were a person with normal human expectations of decency being exploited by someone without any. Marcus set down the bank book and looked at me directly. Here's what I need you to understand. What he did isn't just morally wrong. It's criminal. Multiple felonies. We're looking at identity theft, wire fraud, credit card fraud, possibly elder abuse depending on when he obtained the account information. He's facing serious prison time if we prosecute this fully. Good, I said, and I meant it. No hesitation, no guilt, just pure conviction. I want to press charges. All of them. I want him to face every possible consequence for what he's done. Marcus studied me for a moment, probably trying to gauge if I was going to change my mind once the reality set in. But he must have seen something in my expression, that same cold determination that had been building since Thanksgiving, because he nodded. Okay then, let's bury him. We spent another hour going over strategy, timelines, what to expect from the process. Marcus explained that he'd need to coordinate with the DA's office, that there would be investigations and interviews, and probably a lot of waiting while the wheels of justice turned at their famously glacial pace. But he seemed confident, almost eager, in that way that lawyers get when they have a case that's so clear-cut it's basically a slam dunk. I left his office around noon feeling lighter than I had in weeks, despite the fact that I'd just set in motion a legal process that would probably dominate my life for the next several months. But it felt right. It felt like I was finally doing something instead of just reacting, finally taking control instead of being swept along by the Carter family's chaos. I was walking to my car, mentally planning to stop by Aunt Lucille's and report on the meeting, when my phone buzzed. Another unknown number, which immediately put me on edge because the last time I'd answered an unknown number it had been Harold's work phone asking to talk. But when I answered, it wasn't Harold. It was Evelyn, and she was crying. Not the theatrical, attention-seeking crying from the phone call last week. This was real crying, the kind that makes people's voices go all thick and broken, the kind you can't fake even if you're an excellent actress, which Evelyn definitely wasn't. I need to see you, she said between sobs. Please. I'm leaving him. I'm leaving Harold. You were right about everything, and I'm so sorry, and I have something you need to see. Every instinct I had was screaming, trap, trap, it's obviously a trap, hang up now. But there was something in her voice, something desperate and genuine that made me pause. Also, I was curious. Sue me. After everything that had happened, I wanted to know what could possibly make Evelyn Carter, the woman who defended her husband through fraud and theft and public humiliation, finally decide to leave. Where are you? I asked cautiously. Outside your aunt's house. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes trying to work up the courage to knock on the door. I brought some of your things. And something else. Something I found in Harold's desk that you need to see. I could have told her to leave it on the porch and drive away. I could have hung up and called the cops to report a suspicious person lurking outside Lucille's house. But that curiosity, that damned curiosity that had gotten me into trouble my entire life, won out. Stay there. I'm 10 minutes away. I drove back to Aunt Lucille's, probably breaking several traffic laws, that coffee from Marcus's office making my heart race, or maybe that was just adrenaline. When I pulled up, there was Evelyn's Mercedes parked across the street, and she was sitting in the driver's seat looking like she'd aged about 10 years in the past 2 weeks. Her makeup was smudged, her hair wasn't styled in its usual perfect waves, and she was wearing a sweatshirt. Evelyn Carter, who I'd never seen in anything more casual than business casual, was wearing a sweatshirt. She got out when she saw me, carrying a reusable grocery bag, the fancy kind from Whole Foods that cost $5 and made people feel good about themselves, and her eyes were red and puffy from crying. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, her voice small in a way I'd never heard it before. Evelyn was usually all bold statements and loud opinions, but right now she sounded defeated. I didn't say anything, just gestured for her to follow me inside. Aunt Lucille was in the kitchen making what smelled like lemon pie, and when she saw Evelyn, her expression could have frozen lava. "That woman is not welcome in my house," Lucille said firmly. "It's okay," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure it was. "She says she's leaving Harold. She has something I need to see." Lucille humphed, but didn't physically throw Evelyn out, which I took as permission to continue. We sat in the living room, me on the couch, Evelyn perched nervously on the edge of the chair like she might need to make a quick escape. She reached into the grocery bag and pulled out some of my stuff. A few books, some old CDs, my college diploma that I'd forgotten was even there. And then she pulled out a journal. My journal. The one I'd kept during the first year of my marriage. Back when I still thought writing down my feelings might help me process the slow realization that I'd married into a family of narcissists. I found this in the garage, Evelyn said quietly. And I read it. I know I shouldn't have, but I did, and she started crying again. You wrote about how alone you felt, how Harold made you feel worthless, how you'd catch me and Sabrina making fun of you when you left the room. Everything you wrote. It was all true, and we all just pretended it wasn't happening. I took the journal from her hands, feeling weird about someone reading my private thoughts, but also feeling vindicated in a strange way. Harold lied to all of us. Evelyn continued. He told me you were fine with lending him money. He said you'd given permission for those credit cards. He said the Facebook post was something you'd laughed about, but it was all lies. She looked up at me with eyes full of tears and what might have been genuine remorse. He even borrowed money from my relatives using your name. Told my brother you needed a loan for a business investment. My brother gave him $15,000 thinking he was helping you. $15,000. On top of everything else. The number just kept growing. I'm leaving him, Evelyn said again. I filed for separation this morning. I wanted you to know that, and I wanted to give you this journal back, and I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I looked at her. This woman who'd called me selfish, who'd tried to withdraw money from my account, who defended her husband through everything, and I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no sympathy, just exhaustion. You made your bed, I said, repeating the same words she'd once told me when I'd complained about Harold's behavior. Good luck lying in it. Her face crumpled, but I didn't feel bad. I stood up, gestured toward the door, and watched her leave with her empty grocery bag and her regrets. Aunt Lucille appeared from the kitchen with a slice of lemon pie. You handled that well, she said, handing me the plate. Did I? Better than she deserved. Lucille sat down next to me. You gave her the same grace. She gave you, which is to say, none at all. I ate my pie and read through my old journal, remembering the man who'd written those entries. The guy who genuinely believed love could fix everything, who'd thought if he just tried harder, was more patient, more understanding, that eventually the Carter family would accept him. That guy was gone. And honestly, good riddance. You know that feeling when you watch a Jenga tower finally collapse after someone's been pulling pieces out recklessly for an hour? That satisfying moment when physics and consequences finally catch up with hubris and stupidity? That's exactly what watching the Carter family implode felt like, except instead of wooden blocks, it was their entire lives crashing down, and instead of feeling bad about it, I was sitting front row with popcorn. It started the following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after my meeting with Marcus Chen. I was at Aunt Lucille's house working remotely. My boss had been incredibly understanding about the whole my in-laws committed multiple felonies against me situation and had let me work from home indefinitely. When Logan called with news that was so good I almost didn't believe it. Harold's been fired, he said without preamble, and I could hear the grin in his voice even through the phone. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. What? When? How do you know? My buddy Dave works in the same building. He said security escorted Harold out this morning with a box of his stuff. Apparently, the company launched an internal investigation after your lawyer contacted them about the fraud, and they found some other inconsistencies in Harold's expense reports. Dude's been padding his business expenses for years. Of course he had. Because why commit one type of fraud when you could commit multiple types and really go for the gold? Harold had apparently been billing personal expenses to the company. Fancy dinners with Evelyn that he claimed were client meetings, golf trips that were definitely not business-related. Even that fishing boat purchase had somehow been partially expensed as team-building equipment. The man had turned fraud into a lifestyle brand. They're not just firing him, Logan continued. They're pursuing their own charges. Corporate fraud, embezzlement, the whole 9 yards. Richard Morrison apparently told the board that Harold had compromised the integrity of the organization, which is corporate speak for, this guy's a criminal and we want nothing to do with him. I leaned back in my chair and smiled at the ceiling. Harold had spent years obsessing over his reputation at that firm, networking and schmoozing and playing golf with people he probably hated, all to climb that corporate ladder. And now he'd been thrown off it so hard, he'd probably left a crater. The same man who'd called me a failure on Facebook was now unemployed, under investigation, and probably unhireable in his industry. Karma didn't just come knocking. It kicked down the door and brought receipts. But wait, as they say in those late-night infomercials, there's more. 2 days later, Tiffany, Sabrina's sister, the self-proclaimed influencer who'd mocked me with my Superman socks, discovered that actions have consequences in the form of credit card applications. She'd apparently tried to open a new card at some luxury department store so she could finance more ring lights and whatever else influencers buy to maintain the illusion of success, and got denied. Not just denied, but flagged. Logan heard about this through the family grapevine. Apparently Tiffany had called their cousin Jessica in hysterics, and Jessica had called her mom, who'd called Logan's mom, who'd called Logan, because that's how family gossip works. It's like a game of telephone, except everyone's actually trying to get the message right because the drama is too good to misquote. Turns out that when the fraud investigation started, the credit bureaus had flagged the entire Carter family network as high risk. Harold's fraudulent activities had created this web of financial red flags, and anyone associated with him was now under scrutiny. Tiffany, who'd been living off Harold's money and his ill-gotten gains for years, was suddenly discovering what it felt like to be treated like a credit risk. Her application hadn't just been denied. It had been flagged for potential fraud association, which meant she'd be explaining her family's criminal activity to creditors for years. She's claiming it's unfair. Logan told me over beers at Lucille's kitchen table. Says she didn't do anything wrong and shouldn't be punished for her dad's mistakes. Interesting, I said, taking a sip. So when she destroyed my stuff and mocked me, that was hilarious. But when she faces consequences for being part of a family that committed fraud, suddenly fairness matters. Exactly. Logan clinked his bottle against mine. Welcome to consequences, Tiffany. Population you. And then there was Sabrina, my soon-to-be ex-wife, the woman who'd laughed when her father called me a failure, who'd sat there drinking champagne and posting about people who can't take a joke, while her family systematically destroyed everything I owned. She'd gone completely dark on social media. No Instagram stories about how blessed she was. No Facebook posts about living her best life. No TikTok videos with whatever song was trending that week. Her accounts were still up. I checked, because I'm petty and I wanted to see, but they'd been radio silent for over a week. The woman who documented every meal and every outfit and every thought that passed through her head had suddenly discovered the value of privacy right around the time her father got arrested. Because yes, Harold had been arrested. Marcus had called me Wednesday afternoon with that particular piece of good news. The DA had moved faster than expected, probably because the case was so clear-cut a law school dropout could have prosecuted it. Harold had been charged with identity theft, wire fraud, credit card fraud, and embezzlement from his former employer. He'd been released on bail. Apparently, Evelyn had posted it using money from her own family, which had to sting, but the damage was done. His mugshot was public record. His name was in the local news. The man who'd been so concerned about his reputation had become the cautionary tale people would tell at dinner parties about why you should run background checks on your in-laws. I spent that entire week gathering documents like I was preparing for the trial of the century, even though Marcus said we probably wouldn't even need to go to trial. The evidence was overwhelming. The confession letter alone was damning enough, but I wanted everything organized, categorized, and ready. Call it petty, call it excessive, call it whatever you want. I called it insurance. I created a folder on my laptop titled, "You Don't Own Me Anymore," which I thought was appropriately dramatic and also accurate. Inside went digital copies of everything. Harold's confession letter, the credit reports showing the fraudulent accounts, bank statements from my grandmother's drained account, receipts from the shoebox, screenshots of the Facebook post, photos of my destroyed man cave, text messages from the Carter family making demands and threats, Evelyn's confession about Harold's lies, everything. It was a greatest hits album of their terrible behavior, and every track was a banger. But the digital copy wasn't enough. I wanted them to see it, to hold it in their hands and realize exactly how much evidence I had against them. So I printed everything out. Used up 3 ink cartridges at Lucille's house, printing page after page of their crimes and cruelty. Organized it all with tabs and labels like I was preparing a presentation for a Fortune 500 company. Put it in a manila envelope that was so stuffed it barely closed. "You're really doing this," Aunt Lucille said, watching me seal the envelope. It wasn't a question. I'm really doing this, I confirmed. Good, she said firmly. They need to see what they've done. All of it, laid out where they can't deny it or minimize it or call it a joke. That Saturday afternoon, I drove to the house I'd once called home. The place where I'd cooked Thanksgiving dinner and folded napkins and tried so hard to be accepted by people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient target. Logan had offered to come with me for backup, but I wanted to do this alone. This was my closure, my final act in the Carter family drama, and I needed to do it myself. The house looked the same as always. Perfectly manicured lawn that Harold paid someone else to maintain. Expensive cars in the driveway that were probably being repossessed as I sat there. That ridiculous lawn gnome that Evelyn thought was whimsical, but actually looked like it was judging everyone who walked past it. I sat in my car for a moment, engine running, looking at this house that had never really been my home, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no nostalgia, just indifference. I got out, walked up to the mailbox at the end of the driveway, and dropped in the envelope. It landed with a satisfying thud, and I stood there for a second imagining Harold opening it, seeing page after page of his documented crimes, realizing that I hadn't just walked away from this family. I'd built a case against them. Then I walked back to my car, got in, and pulled up my music library. Scrolled until I found the perfect song. Queen's Another One Bites the Dust started playing through my speakers, and I turned it up. Loud. So loud that I'm sure if anyone was home, they could hear it through the walls. And then I drove away. No looking back. No second thoughts. No dramatic confrontation. Just me, driving away from that house for the last time, with Freddie Mercury singing about dust, and I was grinning like an absolute lunatic because it was perfect. The whole thing was absolutely perfect. The Carter family empire hadn't just crumbled. It had been systematically demolished, brick by brick, consequence by consequence. And the best part? They'd done most of the work themselves. I'd just provided the documentation. Months passed. My savings grew. I landed a new job managing logistics at a small firm run by people who didn't film their employees folding napkins. Revolutionary concept, I know. Then one random Tuesday, Ben texted, "Dad's drinking. Mom left. Sis disappeared. Guess you were right." I stared at that message for exactly 3 seconds before typing back. I usually am. Then I blocked him. Felt good. Felt really good, actually. Aunt Lucille and Logan insisted I stay until I was ready to move out, which turned into 4 months of the best homemade cooking and unconditional support a guy could ask for. Eventually, I got my own apartment by the river, quiet, sunny, with a kitchen where nobody filmed me working or stole my grandmother's money. Every morning now, I make coffee in my own place, sit by the window watching the water, and whisper Harold's words back to myself. Look at this failure. He was always a servant. Then I laugh. Because yeah, I was a servant, to people who didn't deserve it. But the servant retired, built his own kingdom, and left the Carters exactly where they belonged, in the dust.